Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. I am going to talk to you about a claim concerning a supposed Ukrainian war crime that I've seen a lot on Twitter and other places, but I've also been asked to comment on it in a couple of threads underneath some of my videos. So this is just going to be my not hugely considered response, but just my initial thoughts, and of course my opinions may change. Now, the first thing I think about when I hear the claims there's a Ukrainian war crime, well, the first thing to bear in mind is that there are some 40,000 Russian war crimes at the moment. So it's about getting an understanding of the context here. Now, this isn't whataboutery. This isn't yeah, but what about, if I said to you, this is more formally called the tu quoque fallacy. So if I came to you and said, you know, I don't like the fact that you've just murdered Harry, right? And I think that's morally wrong. Like if you turned around and said, yeah, but you murdered Jill and Sam, like that's like two quoques, you too, right? Yeah, but what about you murdering Jill and Sam? It's like, okay, I may have murdered Jill and Sam, but it doesn't morally justify you murdering someone else. So these are two separate things. The fact that I've killed two people doesn't justify you killing one person. Okay, so it's worth bearing that in mind. But so what it looks like I'm saying now is, oh, what about Russia doing 40,000? However, the context is important. So war is a really horrible place. So you think of the Second World War and every single country in the Second World War, every country that was involved in that war would have committed war crimes. Britain would have committed war crimes. Yeah? Um, bombing Dresden, arguably. America, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, dropping a nuclear weapon, an atom bomb on a city. Like, you don't get a bigger war crime than that. They're kind of like the atom bombs of the Second World War kind of bypass our moral evaluation because it's kind of they're already in our baggage of our cultural baggage, right? So we forget to really think about that and go, oh my goodness, like if Russia dropped a nuclear bomb on Kyiv now, we would go nuts, right? It would be absolutely abhorrent. And yet, the Allies effectively, or the US, did that in Japan twice. Okay, so the point is that wars are really horrible places, and humans make mistakes and are under pressure and do really bad things. And not everyone in an army is going to be fighting for the same thing or the right cause or have the same moral character. So for the British Army, in the Second World War, in the Falklands or wherever, there will be some rotten apples in those armed forces. Any army. Right, so in Ukraine there will be some rotten apples, and I think this might have even involved mercenaries fighting for Ukraine, but I'm not 100% sure. I need to check that out. So anyway, point being that Russia have committed just loads of war crimes, and so when you see Ukraine have done a war crime, you see it flood the social media. It's as if there's a parity there. So I'm not excusing Ukraine by saying this, but what I'm trying to get you to understand is that there are Russian troll farms flooding places like Twitter with the claims that Ukraine have committed this war crime. As if to say, Ukraine are terrible, look at these horrible human beings. And yet they have committed some 40,000 war crimes plus. I mean, the entire city of Mariupol is just completely destroyed. And they're raping and murdering and shooting people in the back of the head and all these kind of civilians, that is, in the back of the head and all these terrible things. And then to suddenly flood the social media space with these claims of Ukrainian war crime does not give you a parity, right? Remember that. And also think about why all these bots seem to be posting the same thing. This is a propaganda war. This is a war for the information space. This is your 5th generation style of warfare. So the next thing to think about is my own psychology. I am pro-Ukrainian. I am for moral and political reasons. So I am looking at everything like Russia are the bad guys, Ukraine are the good guys. And I'm going to be really simplistic. I know it's more complicated than that. And actually, it's part of what this is about. The war is particularly grey and life is nuanced, and it isn't just, black and white. There's a lot of grey involved. But when I look at these claims that Ukraine have committed a war crime, the first thing my brain wants to do is say, how can this be wrong? How can the evidence be seen in such a way that it gets Ukraine off the hook? So I need to be aware that that's what my brain wants to happen. And I want this to be the case that it is wrong, that Ukraine haven't committed a war crime. And so I need to be careful that I am not bringing that motivated reasoning to this evaluation in such a way that it's really going to bias my evaluation. And we'll talk about this as we go, because am I doing this? You can answer this as I go and evaluate these claims. And the other thing to say is, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. I don't know enough information about this situation to be able to make a really informed decision. And that's okay. That's okay to say, I don't know. Anyway, let's get on to the actual claims. There's enough preamble. Where did this happen? I think it's happened in Makiivka, there are several Makiivkas. This is the one on the Kupiansk down to Svatvei, down to Kremena front line, and near a place called Chervonopepivka, Ploshchanka, just back from Ploshchanka, Makiivka. I think it happened around here, but I don't know, and actually it didn't really matter where it happened. I'm going to show you a video up to a certain point. You don't see anything dodgy here. What is the context? Well, the context here is actually really important to what happens. The first thing you need to know is that the Ukrainian soldiers are outnumbered quite a bit, probably at least 2-1 by the looks of it. What's happened is it appears that there are some Russians in some kind of house. The Ukrainians are outside with heavy machine guns, and they are getting the Russians to surrender. Now, if the Russians are surrendering in good faith, then you need to protect these guys. And we'll talk about this in a bit. There's something called perfidy. So if these guys are surrendering, that's good. And you get them to follow the guidelines. Happy days. But if something goes wrong here, that all changes. So the argument is, does something go wrong here? And is it the fault of the Russians that it went wrong? So what is happening is these guys on the outside of this building are getting more Russians, and they are outnumbered. They're getting more Russians to come out of the building and lie down on their fronts, I think with their hands behind their backs and heads, and I can show you that. And this is what happens. So then it cuts to here. So I think there's several things going on. The video's cut and it's not entirely clear. And that's, again, do we know the accuracy of this video? Is it's been spliced together to make it look like a certain way, so on and so forth. It's all about questioning everything. But this is a building on the left, and the Ukrainians have obviously caught the Russians off guard here, and they say, right, come out, we've caught you. If you come out, you'll be done. So you need to come out with your hands up and come and lie down in your front. And this is what happens. They've got a heavy machine gunner outside, someone recording it. There's only a few of them, and being pretty careful here. So now it cuts to a whole bunch of them having come out. Right. So as you can see, there's a whole bunch of these guys lying down. Now, the important thing to notice is that there is other video evidence, and I first saw this a couple of weeks ago, so this isn't super recent. and I didn't show it because it was inappropriate, but it was drone footage of these guys lying down here all dead. So the first thing to say is that all of these guys are in the position they're in now broadly, and they're all dead. They're all shot. So that's something to think about. But what happens next is a Russian comes out of here, and instead of coming out with their hands up, I don't know if it's this bit. No, here's an example of a Russian coming out with their hands up, lying down in a row. Okay, so this is what they've done. I won't show you any more. But what then happens is there's a flash of a guy coming out that shoots at the Ukrainians. So now the Ukrainians are in a situation where the kind of protocol for prisoners is out of the window. They are being attacked by Russians, right? And someone slowed down. It's literally only happens in like these are the frames. These are the frames it happens, and you see a puff of his gun here as he shoots at the Ukrainians. So all of these Russians are lying down, and we have some other guy that comes out and shoots at them. Which here it is again. So here's the guy that comes out. They're all lying down. So not only drawn, but he's not that he's coming out with a weapon drawn and saying, I'm going to shoot you. He comes out with a weapon drawn and initiates the shooting because he is shooting first. So this guy slowed down a moment and lightened it up and sharpened the video and froze a moment of his shots. I let the original sound. So actually, let's play that sound. So that kind of... Unfortunately, the original video has music on it, and it combines the actual sound and music, as so many of these videos do. So you've got this going on. So the Russians, then I won't show you the picture. And again here, military experts point out that the Russians who surrendered and then started shooting at Ukrainian soldiers violated the Geneva Convention, which prohibits simulating capture. So there is no war crime in the actions of the Ukrainians, as discussed in the New York Post. Right. Now, the issue here is that all of these guys are dead in the position they're in. So, which is quite an interesting thing. So they're all lying down and they're dead. Whether the guys with the heavy machine guns were just able to just take everyone out because they thought this was all a trick somehow, maybe they had hand grenades on them, whatever. So what is this thing, perfidy? So in the context of war, perfidy is a form of deception in which one side promises to act in good faith. In this case, this is the Russians. We promise to come out with our hands up and we will lie down and we don't have guns and we are surrendering, such as by raising a flag of truce. It's effectively what happens here, with the intention of breaking that promise once the unsuspecting enemy is exposed, such as by coming out of cover to take the surrendering prisoners into custody or some other such scenario. Perfidy constitutes a breach of the recognized laws of war and so is considered a war crime, as it degrades the protections and mutual restraints developed in the interest of all parties, combatants and civilians. In other words, if this Russian is coming out, if this is a Russian guy, if this is all true, right? If we can take all this for granted, which at the moment that's all we can do. Like we can speculate, but let's assume this is all true. So the Russians are all laying down, and there's another Russian come out. Although it's interesting that he looks like he's dressed in black. I don't know whether that's significant. He comes out, although yeah, I don't know whether that. Yeah. Anyway, he comes out and he shoots at the Ukrainians. So now this is itself a war crime. So when the Russians are accusing the Ukrainians of a war crime, arguably the Ukrainians can say back, no, it's not. It's a war crime of the Russians under perfidy under the Geneva Convention. And let's just talk about how this, and I think this guy must be a soldier, explains it. So all the people calling what happened in Makivka a war crime know absolutely nothing about surrender procedures. Surrenders of enemy forces larger than one's own force are trained and follow procedures. The Ukrainian troops followed the procedure, and because of that, they are alive. This is really important. So when you are talking about training, you are training these different scenarios such that you stay alive, right? You don't know what any of these Russians have on them. Each one of them could have had bombs underneath there. They could have been set up with IEDs, whatever. You don't know that. You don't know that they do. You don't know that they don't. All you know is that one Russian guy, if we can take this to be true, one Russian guy is coming out and shooting at you. And that could indicate that these guys all could be in a situation where they could all stand up and get some guns out or get a grenade out and throw them or whatever. In these situations, you err on a side of caution, because if you don't err on a side of caution, you end up being dead. This is actually it's called overdetermination. In evolutionary theory, I can talk about it, how like animals have evolved to do this, right? If the bush over there is rustling, you can think it could be the wind. I'm all right, Jack. I'm not going to bother doing anything. Or it could be a tiger, in which case I'm going to run away. So of all those times, a guy that says it's always a wind, eventually it's going to be a tiger, and tiger eats him. But for the person who runs away, that person is always safe, whether it's a wind or a tiger, which means that evolution will select in the person who is overcautious. Like those kind of genes that propagate cautiousness will propagate throughout society, and you know, the species, in this case humans, will end up being more cautious. So think about that in this context. If the enemy wants to surrender but outnumbers you, then you tell the enemy soldiers to move unarmed and with their hands up to a spot in front of one or two of your machine guns. Make all of the enemy troops lay down. Now, if one of them changes his mind, he is in the machine gunner's sight and can be neutralized easily. And a machine gunner's task is to fire immediately if an enemy soldier moves without being asked to do so. Once all the enemy troops are on the ground, you can call them one by one over to a spot behind the machine gun. You never move to the enemy on the ground, as then you block your machine gunner's sight. Call the enemy troops over one by one, search them, handcuff them, sit them down behind the machine gun to the side. Proceed until all enemy soldiers are searched and handcuffed. This is trained. Troops are expected to follow the procedure to ensure the safety of their own side. The Ukrainian squad set up their heavy machine gun, told the Russians to follow protocol, and all of them would be alive if the last Russian didn't decide to murder them all by opening fire. The machine gunner did as trained. Open fire immediately to ensure no risk comes from the line of Russian soldiers on the ground. Smaller units taking larger units prisoner is dangerous for both sides, and this is why it is trained. This is trained. If you now say this was a war crime, you show you know nothing. The only war crime committed was the Russian soldier opening fire, and he took all his comrades with him by forcing the Ukrainian machine gunner to do his job and open fire. I feel pity for the Russians who surrendered, but this wasn't a war crime. And again, this is a claim that it is in fact perfidy. And the Geneva Convention says it here, it's prohibited to kill, injure and capture an adversary by resort to perfidy. So that's exactly what this would have been. There's a deception in that situation is if this Russian was attempted to kill, injure or capture, but certainly is intending to kill and injure by shooting at them, by using perfidy, then that is prohibited. Like, I don't really need to read on. Acts inviting the confidence of an adversary to lead him to believe that he is entitled to or is obliged to accord protection under the rules of international law applicable in armed conflict with intent to betray that confidence shall constitute perfidy. The following acts are examples of perfidy, and then it goes on to talk about those and more and more on and there. And you can talk about like using emblems of Red Cross and things like that. Which is often an example of this in a different context. But if what I'm claiming is what happened here, if what these guys who are defending the Ukrainians, if what they're saying is correct, then even though I want it to be true, I also think it is true. Like, rationally, this is a war crime on the Russians' behalf, and the killing of all these people is acceptable under the laws of combat, as we've seen in the Geneva Convention. And you cannot know that all of these people lying down are completely without weapon. And so you are justified in being cautious because by being attacked by one is effectively potentially to be attacked by them all. Now you could say, oh, but surely it would have been. You could in that moment, you think about the stress of war. Think about the stress of this environment, right? And how your brain does not work rationally during times of stress. So what happens is you train, and then your body goes into autopilot when that trigger is hit, when you are triggered in a particular way. This has happened, right? So I'm trained, if someone tries to attack me in a situation like this, we treat them all as combatants and we shoot them all. If that's what we're trained, that's what I'm going to do. Rather than say, oh, it looks like this is only this guy that's coming to attack me, so I'm just going to shoot this guy. And then what happens if all those others actually have a gun and they get up and shoot you? Then you end up dying. So that's why you're trained to do that. And that's why arguably this guy followed orders, or these guys followed orders, and all of these people dead who looked like they were executed were in fact dead as a result of this Russian guy's activities. Am I being biased with the way I am evaluating the data? The problem is this data isn't brilliant. It cuts away and it's chaos. Basically, it sort of the camera drops as you'd expect. You know, there are people shooting. You're not going to be like, oh, let me catch this on camera. And then the next thing we see is I've seen other footage of all of these guys dead with bullet wounds. So you know, you can be a bit conspiratorial. You can think in terms of conspiracy theory, and think, well, it doesn't look like they jumped up and they all shot, and maybe so it looks like they were just executing in cold blood. Was that death by that machine gunner that's sitting in front of these guys? Were these guys all killed by that machine gun who had to do that through training, or did they shoot this guy and then just execute all these guys later? But they're all dead in that position. So if they did do that, they didn't, you know, they got them to stay there and then executed them, and that would have been a war crime. But you know, let's react to what we do know, which it appears to me bona fide that a guy comes out and a Russian comes out and tries to attack. And therefore, if that is the case, it appears to me that the death of all these guys is justified in the laws of war. It's not to say it's nice, but it is war. I mean, this is a horrible, horrible, horrible war, as all wars are. Am I being biased? I don't think so. What I want to be true is aligning with what I think is true. Is what I think true based on what I want to be true? So is it as a result of motivated reasoning? No. Hopefully I've given you rational reason that supports my claims and the claims of others who are supporting the Ukrainians in this position. But I am open to being wrong completely. Like if this footage is doctored, or if there are bits that we aren't seeing, or there's more information to throw into this calculation, then I could well be wrong, and I don't have a problem with being wrong. But on the information I have now, that is my conclusion, and I'm sure my conclusion is justified given that information. Let me think what you know. And let me think whether I've done justice to an evaluation of this situation. I hope I have. And you know, what a horrible thing to be talking about. But I think it is important. Some people have asked me to talk about this, and I think we do need to hold Ukraine to account as well as Russia, you know, as and when necessary. Anyway, thank you for your support. Please like, subscribe, share, support my channel in any way, and you know. Hopefully you'll be along to watch my next videos, tomorrow's update, map update, which will be on my main channel as this is, but my extra video tomorrow will be on my ATP Geo channel, a new channel that I'm trying to move all my geopolitical stuff across to. Anyway, thanks, take care, speak tomorrow.